All right. Thank you very much for coming to the event here. We're about to talk about an ETF. I'm an ETF analyst. I'm a true ETF nerd. Every ETF has really interesting stories and facts. I think we're going to learn something here today. That was my goal. So we have 10 minutes to talk about arguably one of the, I call it a stud ETF, the Qs. First question, anybody here own the Qs? Okay, a couple people. Anybody here compete against the Qs? Yeah, okay, a little more. Yeah, no, it's tough. It's one of the best performing ETFs since it came out in 1999. It's up 537% in the past 10 years. It's very difficult to beat. Only a couple active managers have managed to beat it. And this is part of the challenge for our industry is how to beat some of these indexes. So I thought, let's go into what exactly is this thing? Our team sometimes calls the Qs the eighth wonder of the world because it just keeps delivering these incredible returns. It's like, what is going on here? Generally, it's tracking the US stock market, but it's not really beta. It's not, like the S&P, and it's not tech either. Only half of it's tech. So, we have some theories. I want to get your theory. This is Mr. QQQ right here himself. How do you define the Qs? What exactly is it?
Yeah, so QQQ, in my mind, what really defines it is its simplistic methodology. As you alluded to, it's not beta. It's not exactly a tech fund. It is a large cap growth fund, though. Right, so it's grabbing the 100 largest non-financial companies listed on the NASDAQ stock exchange. And what we've seen through the years is just using that simple methodology, which is simpler than the S&P 500, simpler than most large cap growth funds out there, is that it's been able to be really the place to go for companies that are highly innovative. Now, you may ask, Eric, how do you really know that they are innovative? Right, because over the past 5 years, that really has become, everyone became innovative, right, the second half of 2020, because they had to survive. But really, at the end of the day, you have to quantify it. And we quantify that through research and development and patent activity. So looking more specifically at research and development, your average QQQ company is spending about $17 to $18 billion on R&D per year. Your average S&P 500 company is spending about 11 to 12 billion. Now, you may also say, well, Paul, there's decent overlap between the two funds now. The Qs is only 100 companies. You're right, there's about 86 different companies from NASDAQ 100 and the Qs that are within the S&P 500. It's interesting, though, if you take those 86 companies out of the S&P 500, that R&D spend drops from about 12 billion down to about 1.7 billion. So you're looking at a multiple of about 11x there. That really is the proof in the pudding of how are these NASDAQ 100 companies innovative.
Yeah, I think it is kind of innovative beta, if you will. Now, why is that? So I've thought deeply about this, as I do about ETFs. As I said, that's my job. And I call it the Steve Jobs effect. If you pull the thread on the Qs, it's like, okay, what is it? It's just companies that listed on NASDAQ. What's the big deal? Well, I think the inception moment here is in 1980 when Steve Jobs, 27 years old, decided to list Apple on NASDAQ. Now, NASDAQ was not the biggest exchange. The obvious place would go to NYSE. And I think he, as he did it in a somewhat of a rebellious move. It was trying to get known as the tech exchange. And I think it attracted a lot of other people who over the years have really become to worship Steve Jobs. If you're a visionary type tech founder, I mean, he's kind of like, one of the real inspirations probably for your career. So I think a lot of people came over. The metaphor I use is when Michael Jordan picked Nike as his shoe brand in 1984. That was also a shocker. Nike was third, not even known as a basketball shoe, and everybody followed him there because he made Nike cool. What do you think of my theory?
Well, being a Chicago guy, I appreciate the Michael Jordan analogy. And I own a closet full of Jordans, so it really was a revolution, right? So, but I think you're 100% right. If you think about QQQ, it really is grabbing just 100 companies that list on the exchange. That through the conversations that I've had with NASDAQ, though, is that's part of their pitch, is that they have a pedigree of having technologically focused companies list on their exchange. Right? If you walk through their office off of 43rd in Times Square, you'll see this big pictures of all these large tech giants going public. You have Steve Jobs up there, you have Jeff Bezos, and the many others that have. And if you're a young CEO who thinks that they're going to change the world within their industry, why wouldn't you want to list on the same exchange as those?
Yeah, so if any quants are out here, can we work on the Steve Jobs factor? When we get out of here, I'll meet you later. We'll write a paper on it. Anyway, okay. Speaking of Apple, Apple is one of the Mag 7. Now, the big thing in my industry and research is, should you go away from the Mag 7, right? The Mag 7 make up 33% of the S&P and 40% of the Qs. Some say, this is too concentrated. We did a little digging into this, and the Mag 7, by the way, has acquired 850 companies. I mean, these are gigantic companies. The guy who covers them in Bloomberg Intelligence refers to them as small countries. They are massive. I mean, YouTube and Google is probably the best example. If you spun out YouTube, it'd be like a top 20 stock in the US. So we call them the Mag 70. And that makes us just be a little less worried about the concentration. But we do see this year people going to equal-weighted indexes. RSP is taking in a ton of flows. What's your response when someone comes and says, yeah, I like the stocks, but I don't like the weightings?
Yeah, it's a common question that we get. You know, it's not uncommon for the Qs to have 48, 50% within the top 10 holdings, as you alluded to. Mag 7 makes up over 30% of the S&P 500. It makes up around 40% within QQQ. And with everything that's been going on basically since October, within questions around software, et cetera, we have gotten a lot of those questions. We've seen broadening out within the market. We've seen value taking money. We've seen small size taking money, as you alluded to, RSP taking in nearly $10 billion this year. But I think at the end of the day, it brings up two different things. The first thing would be is that these companies within QQQ are the conglomerates of the 21st century. You mentioned YouTube. It doesn't stop with them. There's Amazon as well. There's Microsoft that has many other subsidiaries underneath a Meta. You know, and it doesn't stop within tech. You have a company like PepsiCo that has a bunch of different brands that are part of the portfolio as well. So you have diversification underneath the hood, underneath that one company's ticker that a lot of people don't realize. The second thing would be is that you have to remember where QQQ typically falls within a portfolio. As much as I would love for it to replace the S&P 500, and I'd be more than happy to have an individual conversation why that should be, realistically, it's used as a bolt-on to your core holding, which is usually the S&P 500. Right? I can understand if I hold SPY, VOO, and the top 10 holdings or Mag 7 are 30 to 40%. But if you're looking at the portion of your portfolio that is supposed to be the growth engine of your portfolio, and then you think about the global economy where you have several major companies, right now it's around 7, right? That could be expanded out to 8 or 9 if you think about it, that have been the driver of fundamental growth over the past 10 years. Why wouldn't you want to market cap weight that portfolio? You know, we've seen fundamental growth within the QQQ outpace that of the S&P 500. You have revenue growth outpacing along with earnings outpacing. So really it has been the growth engine of the portfolio. And I think you need to keep that in mind when thinking about concentration.
All right, just real quick, we got about a minute and a half. Sticking with the basketball metaphor, if the Mag 7 are the starters, give me some bench players. You know, you look at the Qs, there's 100 stocks. I looked through it last night in preparation. What are some names in there that are exciting to you that people don't really think about?
Yeah, so I think if you think about QQQ, a lot of the companies that get the headlines are tech. It's 50% tech. But we like to take a look underneath the hood at some of these other companies that really have been making an impact within their own fields. Intuitive Surgical, which isn't necessarily a household name, but a very large, well-known company within healthcare. You also have a name that moved in more recently that a lot of people don't realize is in there is Walmart, right, from its recent change of venues, right? So that's not exactly on the bench within there. It's a top 10 holding. But you get a lot of different exposures within there. They're outside of the Mag 7, outside of tech, that really have an impact on the portfolio.
Yeah, I mean, if Walmart's on your bench, that's like dream team status right there, I think. So anyway, we're out of time. Thank you very much for your attention, and thank you very much for talking about the Qs.
Thanks, Eric.
All right.